A boy enters a workshop in Galilee. 18 years pass. A man emerges to be baptized in the Jordan. Between these two moments, Scripture falls silent. Luke records him at 12, astonishing the teachers in the temple. Then, nothing. The next verse the seeker encounters. He is nearly 30 years old, standing waist-deep in the waters of the Jordan. 18 years. Vanished. Not a parable, not a miracle, not a single recorded word. This is not an oversight. The silence itself is the mystery. What happened to the boy who confounded the scholars of Jerusalem? Where did he go? What did his hands build? What did his eyes witness in a land crushed beneath the boot of Rome, governed by puppet kings and seething with rebellion? By the end of this investigation, the seeker will understand exactly what those 18 silent years contained. Reconstructed not through speculation, but through the hard architecture of history itself. Roman census records, archaeological strata, rabbinic law, and the testimony of Josephus. Welcome to Bible Secrets, Hidden History. Before unlocking these ancient archives, consider joining this community of seekers by subscribing. If this history deserves to be preserved, a simple like helps this truth reach those who search for it. Chapter 1. The Galilean Dust. To understand the missing years, the seeker must first understand the world that swallowed them. Nazareth, in the 1st century, was no city. It was a hamlet, perhaps 400 souls. A scattering of limestone houses carved into a hillside, surrounded by terraced fields of olive and grain. Excavations beneath the modern Basilica of the Annunciation have revealed cisterns, grain silos, and modest dwellings. A settlement of laborers, not scholars. This was a peasant village, easily forgotten, exactly as Nathanael's contemporaries dismissed it. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? But 4 kilometers distant stood a different world entirely. Sepphoris, the ornament of Galilee, as Josephus named it. In 4 BCE, following the death of Herod the Great, the city of Sepphoris erupted in rebellion. The Roman general Varus crushed it without mercy. Josephus records the aftermath in his Antiquities of the Jews. The city burned, its inhabitants sold into slavery. And then, rebuilding began. A grand reconstruction project, lasting decades, transforming Sepphoris into a Roman-style city with a theater, a palace, paved colonnades, and elaborate mosaics. This reconstruction began in the very years of Jesus' childhood, and it required laborers, stonemasons, carpenters, builders. Chapter 2. The word misunderstood. Here the seeker encounters one of the great mistranslations of Scripture, a single Greek word, carrying the weight of an entire hidden vocation. Mark 6:3 calls Jesus ho tekton. For centuries, this has been rendered simply as carpenter. The Greek word tekton does not mean carpenter alone. It is far broader, far more weighty. Tekton denotes a craftsman of construction, one who works wood, yes, but also stone, a builder, an artisan of structures. In the classical world, the term could describe someone who shaped roof beams, door frames, plows, yokes, and also someone who cut and dressed stone for walls, foundations, and public buildings. Galilee in this era was a land of limestone, not forest. Timber was scarce, costly, often imported. A tekton in 1st century Galilee was, by necessity, a man who worked stone as readily as wood. This single word reframes everything. The boy of Nazareth was not confined to a quiet shop, planing wood for plows. He was trained in a trade that built houses, synagogues, and quite possibly, the very colonnades rising in Sepphoris, a single morning's walk from his home. Was Jesus among the laborers who rebuilt the ornament of Galilee? No scripture confirms it directly. But the geography is undeniable. The timeline is undeniable. A craftsman's son, in a village 4 kilometers from the largest construction project in the region, during the exact decades of his unrecorded youth. Chapter 3. The weight of the law. The lost years were not idle. Jewish custom of the period bound a young man's life with rigorous structure, governed by Torah, by trade, and by family obligation. By the age of 5, a Jewish boy began study of the written Torah. By 10, the Mishnah, the oral tradition of law. By 13, he became bar mitzvah, a son of the commandment, bound fully to the obligations of the covenant. The Mishnah Tractat Avot records a structured progression of Jewish education. At 5 years old, one is fit for the scripture, at 10 for the Mishnah, at 13 for the fulfilling of the commandments. This was not unique to Jesus. This was the expected path of every Jewish son in Galilee. As the eldest son, for Mark 6:3 names, brothers James, Joses, Judas, and Simon, and sisters besides, a heavier burden would have fallen upon him. Jewish law and custom dictated that the eldest son inherit not only a double portion, but responsibility. If Joseph died before his sons reached maturity, and Joseph vanishes entirely from the narrative after the temple incident at age 12, never mentioned during the adult ministry, the eldest son became head of household, provider, protector of his mother, guardian of his siblings. This is not myth. This is the iron law of patriarchal Jewish society, recorded in the Mishnah, in the Talmud, in the customs preserved across centuries of Jewish life. The missing years, then, were not years of wandering. They were years of labor, of stone dust on calloused hands, of providing bread for a widowed mother and younger siblings, in a village that offered no comfort and no margin for idleness. Chapter 4. The Roman Shadow. No reconstruction of these years is complete without reckoning with the empire that ruled them. Galilee under Herod Antipas was a tetrarchy, a Roman client state, taxed, watched, and periodically convulsed by unrest. The historian Josephus catalogues revolt after revolt during this very period. The uprising of Judas of Galilee around 6 CE, recorded also in Acts 5:37, a rebellion sparked by the Roman census. The same census, some scholars argue, that forms the backdrop to the nativity narrative itself. The Roman historian Tacitus, writing decades later in his Annals, described Judea under this period with characteristic bluntness, noting unrest as endemic to the province even before the Great Revolt of 66 CE. This was not a peaceful backdrop for a quiet carpenter's life. This was a tinderbox. A young Tecton, working in Sepphoris, would have labored under the shadow of Roman engineering, Roman taxation, Roman crucifixion, the punishment reserved for rebels and slaves, a punishment whose wooden instrument a craftsman would have understood with chilling intimacy. The cross was not abstract to a builder. He would have known its construction, its weight, its purpose. This is the silence behind the silence. Not merely absence of record, but a life lived inside political tension, religious obligation, and physical labor, all converging beneath a sky watched by Rome. Chapter 5. The Hidden Scroll of Tradition. No canonical gospel speaks to these years, but the silence did not satisfy every ancient mind. In the 2nd and 3rd centuries, texts such as the Infancy Gospel of Thomas attempted to fill this void, describing a child Jesus performing miracles, shaping birds from clay, striking down a companion in anger. The early church overwhelmingly rejected these accounts. They were excluded from the canon precisely because they contradicted the sober, restrained witness of the four Gospels, and because they transformed a humble craftsman's son into a capricious wonder-worker, unrecognizable beside the man who would later weep at Lazarus' tomb and wash his disciples' feet. The rejection of these apocryphal tales is itself revealing. The early church preferred silence to fabrication. It would rather the seeker wonder than be deceived. And so the truest answer the historian can offer is this: ordinary labor, sacred in its obscurity. A craftsman shaping wood and stone, a son fulfilling the law, a man absorbing in silence the full weight of a broken, occupied, waiting world before the day he set down his tools forever, walked to the Jordan, and let the water close over a life no longer hidden. The mystery the seeker carried from the cold, open now finds its answer. The 18 silent years were not empty. They were not divine vacation from humanity. They were the forge, stone dust, law, duty, empire pressing close on every side. A man becoming, in obscurity, the very thing his ministry would later proclaim, that holiness is not found in spectacle, but in the patient, faithful labor of ordinary days. Perhaps this is the deeper truth the lost years reveal. Divinity did not bypass the dust of Galilee. It walked through it, hammer in hand, burden on his shoulders, unseen and unbroken. If this hidden history has illuminated what Scripture left in shadow, the next chapter awaits. Another forgotten truth, another sealed archive, ready to be opened.